Muy buenas tardes a toda la comunidad del Programa Nacional de Inglés, a los maestros, a las maestras, a los asesores externos que nos acompañan, y autoridades educativas, coordinadores y responsables académicos que nos han venido apoyando, dándole seguimiento no solamente a los Buenavir, sino a todas las actividades que están programadas. Recordarles que estaremos teniendo abierta la plataforma hasta el 21 de agosto próximo, para que los que tengan que atender temas con el Consejo Técnico Escolar no sientan esta presión. Estos eventos, estas charlas están también grabadas y están disponibles en la plataforma para poderlas consultar en un momento posterior. Si no pueden de momento atender alguna de estas charlas, podrán ingresar a la plataforma, volverlas a revisar, a cargar y pues ir atendiendo cada una de las actividades. Tendremos 2 semanas más, de tal manera que este ejercicio se convierte de 3 a 5 semanas para quienes han tenido dificultades en Tamaulipas, que ha habido temas con inundaciones por el huracán y diferentes circunstancias que a nivel nacional nos están afectando. Sin embargo, en esta posibilidad que tenemos de ampliar el espacio, pues se ha tomado esa decisión, se ha publicado en sus salones, en los avisos a la comunidad. Pues bien, vamos a continuar retomando la charla que ayer de manera muy interesante nos ofreció tanto Rosalía Valero como Johnny Frank, respectivamente de Cambridge y de Michigan, para que pues vayamos contextualizando pues, los retos que tenemos de trabajar en situaciones emergentes como estas de la pandemia, esta segunda semana enfocada a temas de metodología de la enseñanza. Gracias, bienvenidos.
Hola, ¿qué tal?
Bienvenida, Rosalía. Pues todo tuyo el foro.
Muchas gracias. Vamos a empezar,
Gracias.
Johnny y yo. Hello, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Johnny, isn't it great to be back again?
It is. For some reason, I was expecting like a good afternoon back, like you do in a classroom. But anyway, it's fantastic to be back again with you today. We had fun yesterday, and we also think we were able to share some ideas that we saw people appreciated and thought that they were relevant. Just for a reminder for those that weren't able to catch us yesterday, Rosalia, what were we covering?
Today, we'll be talking about returning to the classroom, whatever that classroom may be, whichever the circumstances and the context, right? And just to remind we wanted to remind people, we will be sending the PPTs, the presentations, as well as the list of resources so that everyone can access them, right? So yesterday's and today's. So don't worry about taking notes, etc. We just want you to pay attention. As Johnny said, we really had a great time yesterday. We hope you really had a good time as well. So without further ado, shall we start?
Yeah, so yesterday we focused on looking after ourselves as teachers. We looked at well-being and mindfulness. Today we're going to take a closer step to the classroom, looking at more practical. Well, we had practical suggestions yesterday. These are more practical ones aimed not at mindfulness and well-being, but at the 4 skills. So there are our names. These are our companies, obviously. Our organisation is Cambridge, and within that we have Cambridge Assessment English and Michigan Language Assessment. And it's our pleasure to be here with you today.
Exactly.
And we always feel like every event like this, every webinar or workshop that Rosalia and I do, whether that's together or individually, we feel like we're supporting the mission that you see there, which is really contributing and putting something back into education, learning and research. You might think of Cambridge and Michigan, think of exams, but actually there's a lot of work that goes on around that. That's one part of what we do.
Exactly. And as I've told you before, Johnny, I'm very proud to say I'm a result of Mexican public education. So it's great for me to be with so many colleagues from the public sector here in Mexico. So really very exciting.
And we're going to tap into that a little bit as we go along. Going to shamelessly exploit Rosalia, as we encourage in a good way for you to exploit students as a resource. So we know that we're going back, and we know that we need some inspiration. We also know there are going to be some steps that we need to take. It's not going to be an easy jump back into the classroom. Before we kick off, we've got the first of only 2 mentee surveys today, because we're always interested to hear your views and to understand a little bit more about your context. Yesterday, we discovered that you were mainly pre-primary to primary teaching contexts. Today, what we'd like to ask you to kick off, if you could go to the website there using either the QR code or the link with the password. We'd like you to go to Menti, and there's obviously the 4 skills that we know in English are there, and we'd like you to choose the 2 that you find the most challenging. I think that would be interesting for us to find out, don't you, Rosalia?
Exactly. I mean, we know when we say that we can use a language, be it our first language or a second language, we are talking about 4 different skills, right? We can speak, we can listen to the language, we can read, we can write, right? But when it comes to teaching, and this time we're asking them about the teaching context, right? Because we could also be asking them about the learning side of things, like which skills do you think your learners find more challenging, right? But here, lovely dots going now there. So most challenging to teach.
Exactly, and that was what you were just emphasizing there. We're not looking at this from an abstract perspective or theoretically which skills students might find easier or more difficult. We're thinking about you, the teacher, in this context, and saying which ones, when it comes to teaching and going into class, which ones do you find the most challenging? And it looks like we're getting 2 runaway winners here, Rosalia.
Exactly, and I think, did we actually bet on this? Because I think I'm going, if we did bet, Johnny, I'm going to lose.
Because I think you said you expected writing, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
So and I said, unfortunately, and I've told you this because you're British and Mexican. We have 2 different contexts. When it comes to reading, I remember, I mean, what I like about different countries is that there are lots of different countries where reading is really actively encouraged from a very early age. And we hadn't been, and notice I'm saying we hadn't been doing that in Mexico for a long, long time, right? And how can you write if you're not used to reading?
And that's a very good point. Yeah, I think we're going to close that now. We've had over 700 shares. Thank you for that. So speaking and writing, wow. I'll stop sharing that, and you're going to tell me in a few moments, hopefully, that you can see, Rosalia, again, my PowerPoint. Having to dash between applications, but seamlessly changes. Can you see now the screen we were on?
I can see you, Johnny.
Brilliant. And the presentation?
No.
Okay, might
Are
take
you
another
actually
second.
sharing?
I am sharing.
You sure? It's coming now. Yes.
There we go.
It's happening now.
Delay. Okay, so it's good job
Anything can happen with technology, right? So we were there, and please notice that this time we were also using a QR code. So we were really modern there today, Johnny, right?
From one day to the next, revolutionizing.
Exactly. Always developing ourselves. Continuous professional development.
Absolutely.
In action.
How can we improve? So what we saw there was speaking and writing. We have examples of all 4 skills here. And Rosalia, do you want to introduce us to what we call the 3 R's?
Please,
or reintroduce us?
Yeah. Please, yes, I'll be happy to, because you've heard me talk about being ecological, but not just being ecological, meaning be green and do things. That's very good, and we should all be ecological in that way. But also when it comes to teaching. So here we are encouraging our colleagues, all of you who are here with us, when it comes to the resources that you have created, the different activities that you have planned, etc. What can you do so that you can reduce the amount of time that you use planning, because you want to do other things in your life apart from planning lessons, right? What materials and activities can you recycle, and what can you reuse? So this is being ecological when it comes to planning your teaching and delivering your teaching, right? So 3 very important R's for educators. And remember, when we say educators, we're not just talking about educadores, educadoras, as we say here in Mexico for pre-primary teaching colleagues, but we're talking about people who are in the field of education in general.
Yeah. And I think the most common one of those R's that people will be familiar with is recycling vocabulary. That's the most common one. But when we think about reduce and reuse, maybe we have fewer thoughts on that or ideas. But it's equally important to try to lessen the workload, and also to allow you to be in the here and now, which we spoke a lot about yesterday, and thinking about learning outcomes rather than getting totally overwhelmed by resources and handouts.
Exactly.
And this is where I'm gonna exploit Rosalia to give us a bit of context and what we've
I was
thought.
going to say, this is where you're going to let me speak, right?
Absolutely.
So it's say when we start planning again, we have to remember, if we go back to a physical classroom, and these may happen, we really need to take things into account, like what is safe distance now, right? How is our physical classroom going to change in terms, for example, of seating arrangements, right? How about the number of our students, our learners? Are we going to have all of them? We know that here in Mexico, we have some really big groups of students, right? Both in the public and the private sector. So what is going to happen if we really need to keep a safe distance? How is that going to impact the number of learners that we can have in any given classroom? And then, of course, resources, right? And yes, there are straightforward resources, but there's so many other things that we can think about and that we can find practically everywhere, right?
So this is like an ideas-based webinar. What we've done is use this context to really. We talked yesterday as well about reimagining, going back to school, back to the classroom, and what that might look like. So we've drawn everything towards that benchmark, and that means that you could probably use this in almost any context, because we've gone for things that are simple, easy to do, that don't need too much preparation time. That was always kind of how I was planning lessons especially with primary and younger teens. And so we brought in this concept of dialing down and dialing up. Rosalia, I can hear your sharp intake of breath.
Yes, here I go. So just like yesterday, we said important words that we wanted to focus on, like resilience and disruption, but especially well-being and mindfulness. This time we're talking about dialing down and dialing up. And I know when we started planning these months ago, Johnny, we said this was definitely something really important that we wanted to invite our colleagues to explore. So here you have some definitions, right? Basically, as I said, is how we can make the most of what we have, or what we have created. Okay.
Exactly. So we're often given our resources, textbooks, or curriculum, and we look at it, and there are lots of activities there, but what we really need to do more than ever now, because of the different learning patterns that have occurred over the last few months. Some students might have dedicated the same time, some students less time, some students no time, some students more time than they would normally to their English language learning. So the aspect or the reality that we all know of having a multi-level classroom is going to become even more pronounced over the next 12 months and beyond that, possibly. So part of giving this a bit of context and a bit of a reality check, this kind of tips or checklist-based webinar, was to think of how, as a teacher, you could dial down or dial up. And so what we've taken across the 4 skills are examples of activities that you would find in some of our assessments, just because it's easier due to permissions. But we're not really interacting or engaging specifically with that activity. We're saying this activity type. And the activity types are types that you'll find across whichever textbooks you're using, whichever activities you have in your teacher toolkit.
Exactly.
I'm going to hand the first step that we really like talking about, and I know Rosalia probably even more than I do, is this, Rosalia.
Exactly. You know me well, Johnny, because we worked together so often. Activating schemata. And this is very important. This means that the number of things that we can do actively is not the number of things that we have here that we can do. Even the number of words, for example, that we use when we speak, that is not the number of words that we have here, right? So how can we support our learners? How can we help our learners so that they feel better prepared or ready to start doing some of the activities that we will ask them to do? And we're going to talk about this, but basically this is like getting them ready. And we talk, for example, I know we're going to have examples of warming up and exciting marine life coming soon to the webinar, I know. And please explain.
So this is perhaps the more everybody knows hangman, for example. It has different names in different countries, but normally hangman is a universal word everybody understands. It's a very simple activity, of course, but using words related to maybe a speaking or writing activity that you're going to do, you can start activating schemata. That means those words are going into the learner's minds and they're starting to think and associate different words, and it gives them a head start.
Did you notice, Johnny, that I said marine life coming soon, right? So this is the sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was activating your schemata.
You
were.
And what the thing with this is one I used to do, and it's actually better on a chalkboard, a normal blackboard, than it is. I tried doing this in, I can't remember which, I think maybe in some sort of very basic program, but you get the idea. So at the top of the stairs, Rosalia, that's Johnny. Now,
Johnny with a square head.
With a very square head. Now, Johnny in this situation, he's in danger because every time the students don't get a word that actually is in a letter that's in the word, Johnny goes down a step. So we rub Johnny out and he goes down a step. Maybe he starts having his face gets a bit more worried, it gets sad, it gets, maybe angry at the learners if they're not getting the letters. But basically with primary and with particularly primary, but early junior as well, they love this type of activity.
Exactly.
The blue there is the little shark fin. So you could even draw that and elicit from them what you're drawing.
Yeah, but this is the one we would do with learners, and I was telling you, I love these because hangman can look a little bit violent sometimes. I mean, yes, of course, there is a shark there, and the idea is that Johnny wants to get away from the shark. The shark, of course, wants to get as near Johnny as possible. So this is what we would use with learners. But Johnny, if I were doing this with you, this is not what I would use. Do you know what I would use?
What?
Let's see.
Oh dear. Do I have to?
Yes. Be brave. Right. Okay. If I were using this with Johnny, right, I would have bigger sharks. Like
a great white waiting for me.
Right.
I used to, yeah. You're very cruel sometimes, Rosalia. This is love-hate, isn't it?
I'm not cruel, right? I just love marine life, so.
Well, what you could also do is have
this is a short webinar for PRONI this week, right?
Next week we'll do crocodiles. Speaking of crocodiles and alligators, I used to have students say they wanted to put piranhas, crocodiles, alligators in there. Nice for revising marine life. You could also flip it and have it so Johnny's going up the stairs. And then every time they get a letter right, you reward it by going up the stairs, and maybe there's some sort of prize at the end for him, or he's going to class or going to the cinema or something like that. So there's lots of language you can get out of that, but the idea is that even with a basic letter and word based activity, you can get students excited about things.
Exactly.
And reading, we're starting with reading, Rosalia, which was your bone to pick earlier, that there's not enough reading going on. And if you don't read, how are you going to write?
Exactly. And I love reading. And then when people say, I would like to increase my vocabulary, what should I do? I remember when learners in my classroom asked me that, and I said, I used to smile and said, you read. But if I want to improve my writing, you read. And it was almost like always, it was like reading, right? Because reading can help you so much, right? So let's see. Let's start looking at those activities and how we can dial up and dial down. This is a very simple one, and we're saying this is A1 level, right?
Mhm.
So here we're, of course, referencing the Common European Framework, right? So we say that this is a picture stimulus, right? You have a little very, very easy to see and understand visuals, right? And we said we could have drills. So for example, for the first one, we have, these are grapes, right? And for the second one, we have a mouse, but the cue that we have there is this is what did we write there? This is a house, right? Which of course is wrong.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's very
And
basic
we
reading
also
comprehension.
exactly, and we also said that you could do some sort of total physical response for this, or you could do the 3x3 method that we explored yesterday, right? And you said for the activity in this case, you're seeing it was just basically tick if it's correct, right? And you cross if it's wrong, right? So that is, the first one is right, the second one is wrong. So this is the activity as such, but how can we dial up or dial down?
And just a word to say that if you know, most books will have visuals, some without color, some with color, hopefully. But even at that level, okay, it looks like a very basic activity on the surface, but it needs some introduction. So you could be looking at, like we were saying, picture stimulus, which could be the pictures themselves, or flashcards, or drawings, just to get them into it and warm up, like we said earlier. But how do we make an activity like this a bit more basic? It's already quite simple, isn't it, Rosalia? But I think we can make this even easier.
So remember, when we say dial down, we are thinking, because we were talking about the context, right? What have our learners been doing all this time that we've been at home, right? We really don't know. So maybe some of them have had some practice. Maybe in some cases, their parents, for example, have been helping them practice, and that's a good thing. Maybe in some cases, they haven't had the chance to do anything, and maybe they have gotten lots of different things. So dial down, we go to a lower level where things are less challenging. Right. So it could be, instead of understanding the rubrics, like you have to tick or you have to cross, maybe something as easy as point, right?
Yeah.
Point to the grapes, point to whatever, right? Or when you mention this, then you are saying something, you are enunciating, and you ask them to raise their hands if that is what is really happening or what you are describing, right? Or would this be for right or wrong, Johnny?
Well, you could even play a guess game where there's a flashcard or a drawing from a student put on the board behind the teacher, and you say, these are just guessing from maybe a couple, and they say, if you're correct, thumbs up. If you're incorrect, thumbs down. Definitely, to make these activities more accessible, teacher-led activities are good, so that those are less confidence, and sometimes weaker students are able to gain some confidence from getting the correct answers. Obviously, praising them and saying how fantastically they're doing, even if the activity has been dialed down a little bit to make it a bit more accessible for them. And an even easier aspect is quite a nice one and quite relaxing. Is just getting them to join dots so that they can write, for example, grapes. And that gets a lot of quiet time in primary classrooms. I wouldn't use it all the time unless, you know, you had a particularly weak class, but it helps them start to write if they're a low level. And then after that, you could even unfold the page that they've got, or give them another page and get them just to draw lines, so that you're taking away the rubric, which is saying, see if it's true or false, because conceptually that might be quite difficult for some of them, and they might need to know that everything has a picture in it to match to the phrase.
Exactly. And we also said that maybe when we're thinking about, we said we would be looking at reading activities, but that we're happy when we can sort of mix different skills, right? So it's a reading activity, but we can go to something that includes writing, for example, or speaking, etc. So so there's a different skill. And we know, Johnny, because research has shown that when we engage different activities, not just one, then learning will probably take place more frequently than if we just try to focus on one activity, right?
Exactly. So, I mean, we've got a couple of suggestions there. One is if it's a stronger class, remove the prompts, so they've got the visuals and they have to write what it is in this case. So you're really increasing the difficulty level for them and making it a more challenging activity.
Exactly.
But there are other types of reading. This is probably A1 plus, where the other one was a very low A1. So this is looking at teachers are familiar with this. Obviously, it's short text, and you have to fill the words in. So this is getting a bit more complex. We're going from something at word level to sentence, and even a couple of sentences together. So how might we activate schemata here, Rosalia?
Well, you can have them look at what they can see, right, and see what is it that they can see. So this is here we have the idea that this is about the countryside or the jungle. So you see it the different things. You say, what sort of things can you find in the jungle? What things can you see there, right? You can ask, for example, how about jungles in Mexico, where you live, where we live, right? In this state, is there a jungle in Mexico City? I don't think there is one. If there is one, it must be artificial, right? But where do you think we can find jungles in Mexico, Johnny, for example?
Oh, you always do this. You start quizzing me. I think in the south, right? I'm still not familiar with Mexico.
Show and tell.
South, I'm gonna say kind of Chiapas around there.
Exactly. In the southeast, right? You think about, for example, places like Chihuahua, you don't see jungles there, but you can see jungles in Chiapas in the southeast, precisely, right? And what sort of animals can you find in a jungle, right? Perfect. So you try and get them to start really seeing the jungle inside them using their imagination, right?
Using their mind's eye. Yesterday we were talking about a smiling mind. And today, that kind of creative, imaginative mind. So rather than just going straight into an activity, how can we build those steps so that once we get onto the actual activity, they feel really comfortable. They've been thinking about the topic. They've already got some ideas. They've got connected vocabulary. And yeah, picture is great if you can. It's going to be trickier with some distancing between students, but it's still possible. You could split students into A's and B's. A's open your book at page 27. Show me the book. B's close your eyes. Okay, fantastic. They're all sitting at their desks rather than next to each other. And then you say to the A's, get a piece of paper and slowly reveal the picture and see if they can guess and name vocabulary. Okay, so that would be an interesting way of doing the picture stimulus without having to rely on technology, without having to rely on students getting closer to each other, or ideally, if they were around in a group, you could show them that and do it yourself. But you can still do this activity with distance and with a class by getting them to work in pairs.
And I think by now, Johnny, they have seen the idea that when we have course books, for example, or we have material and we're saying we're going to share the links to all these resources that they can download and start using right away legally, which is really very important, right? But don't just let's not be satisfied with what the authors of the course book created, right? Let's see how you can exploit what they did for you, what you have there. And I think I'm going to get slightly worried about you with this obsession with Hangman, Johnny. Right? But I do agree with you.
Well, this is sentence hangman. So rather than a single word, you could have the beginning of a text. So it could be 4 or 5 words in that sentence, and then you start predicting. So again, it's a different entry point to get kids thinking about what we're going to do today in class, basically. But I do appreciate your concern. But it is quite, I mean, once you just try having Johnny and the shark and they love it. But anyway, I think what your point about the authors was very important. And similarly here, we're just suggesting some ideas. Some of them you might think, that's not for me, or I already knew that. But we're trying to cover some ideas that we hope you'll take a few away from the session and think, I'm going to try that out. That seems like it could work with my learner profile.
Exactly. And for many people, maybe Hangman was only done at word level traditionally, right? But why don't you start exploring sentence Hangman, right?
You could have 2 questions as a warm-up, questions at the end, and you've got the Hangman going. And once they get them, you drill them in that question. They drill each other. So getting those choral and class drills going. And then it's great practice for pronunciation. And you can elicit some of the answers and go around in a chain, even in the class, to say, you know, where did you go at the weekend? At the weekend, I went to. So you've practiced pronouncing it and you go in the class and maybe you make it a memory game. I went to I went to the cinema and Rosalia went to the park. Okay, next person. Okay, so you could do something like that. But how can we dial this down? Well, you could already have this partially completed, whether if there are 5 words to put into the text or 10, maybe 50% of them you've already done for them, or you tell them by showing on the board or on the handout. Or you could have whereby the words are, you maybe have 3 out of the 5 letters already completed. So it's easier for the weaker students just to engage and be able to do the activity. I think another important thing is we look at that and we think, oh, it's a really short text. For primary learners, they look at that and think, wow, that's like a story. It's huge.
Oh,
So
you could do easily 50, 60 minutes with that, because if you think
Yeah.
about all the different pre-reading, during reading, and post-reading activities, wow.
No, absolutely. And to link in what we said yesterday, you could even have breaks there where they have to, if we're talking about the jungle in this case, or the beach, you could have basically miming or TPR that they're doing in pairs, but not close to each other, where they have to guess what each other are doing as a break to get them moving, to break the class up a little bit, and then continue with the text. There's so much you can do with something like this.
Exactly.
And we've got ideas for dialing up, which go from reordering the sentences if the class is particularly good. We were talking about reusing earlier. You could even bring this back into 2 weeks later in the class and say, do you remember this picture? Ah, yeah, what do you remember it was about? Oh, fantastic, you've got great memories. And then say, is this the right order of the text? And, it's a really challenging activity for this age and level, but if you've got a class that are progressing well, then maybe try that out with them. And also getting them to create their own questions. We suggest that a couple of times here. That's great for reading practice, but it's also great for writing practice.
Can I just say something, Johnny, that we as teachers are unfortunately used to asking the questions most of the time.
Yeah.
So we get our learners to become used to answering questions. And we have to make sure that they have opportunities to do both things. They have to be able to ask questions as well as answering questions, right? So we have to make sure whether we are restricting the opportunities, the number of opportunities for them to actually create the questions themselves, right?
Brilliant point. And I totally agree. And when you are asking questions on those occasions, thinking time. It will take some students longer to answer. So not picking on students individually, but I would ask a question even at primary class, and I'd give them a good few seconds to answer, because there are all kinds of things going on in their head. It's difficult to engage with a second language, so give them time. If you watch colleagues teaching, it's a habit that teachers get into that is, it's just everybody slips into it at some stage, but you ask a question and you expect an answer within a second. And it's even with lots of warm-up and activation of schemata and things, you still need to give some thinking time once you're asking questions. Even if you feel they're very simple, the questions, leave a bit of time there. But also, like we said, let's get the students involved. Let's get them creating questions as well when we feel they're capable of doing that.
Exactly. It's amazing how much more they can come up with, the ideas that they can have, and the less challenging it will become with them. For example, as we say, if you really activate their schemata, if you give them an opportunity to start thinking, because they start predicting, right? Yeah. And especially with young learners, I mean, the minute you mention something, they start thinking about things that they would like to do, that they that they have done before,
Exactly.
their friends, their family, etc. Amazing.
Sessions they have, it's you just see their minds going, they're just buzzing. But here we are. Here we've got something that looks a bit older than it is. This is aimed at A1 to A2 level students. And again, approaches to the reading that you could do with this. Again, I would always think of picture-based, to be honest, something visual. What do we say? A picture says 1,000 words, and that can help us out in the English language classroom as well. So depending on the levels of students, either the teacher or between them, they could describe what they see, and then a partner draws it, or you as a teacher, you describe to the class and they draw it. It depends on the behavioral tendencies of your students. And then you can compare and see who got closest. Or you could label the photograph: black hair, white t-shirt, black trousers, camera, circles, that kind of thing.
And there's one thing, Johnny, I think if some of our colleagues look at the reading material and they see that we've said this is for A1 to A2 level, they may think that the reading material is actually maybe a bit too challenging for A1 level, but we always have to remember it's good to let them explore a higher level. We don't expect them to produce at that level, but it should become easier for them, less challenging, to start getting used to seeing things that are at a higher level than we expect them to be, especially when they're producing things, right?
And it gets us as teachers used to dialing down, because you're always going to have a class with a range of levels. And so,
exactly, that's what we say.
yeah.
If the material itself is really challenging, then the activities and the tasks that we design shouldn't be too challenging, right?
Yeah.
We need to compensate.
Exactly. So how might we do that with this type of reading activity? If you're finding your class is struggling with this particular type of task,
you give them both the question and the answer, right? But so they have to find what the right question is with what the right answer, right? Did I make myself clear? I think I
just
confused
matching.
myself.
Yeah, no, like matching. That
right?
makes sense. Yeah.
So this question goes with this answer, right? Or
Perfect.
true or false as a class. It's always great when you don't have to go to personal level, but you can do things in pairs or in small groups, etc., or the whole class, right?
Exactly. And also being careful you're doing examples to start them off as a class, or you're doing an activity almost entirely as a class. And there are contexts for both. Be careful with those concept checking in questions to make sure they're following. So a concept, for example, a concept or a checking question should be an easy response of yes or no. So if they were reading a text describing a boy or something, and they say, "What color is Pedro's hair?" and they've got options, and it goes, "Okay, it's blonde or something." You go, "Is Pedro's hair black?" "No." "Is it red?" "No." They laugh. And then you get to the right question, but it should always be a yes or no answer and a very short question, just for you to check understanding.
It's always good to laugh in the classroom.
Everywhere. I'd say outside the classroom.
It's especially better if they're not laughing at the teacher, but sometimes we do that on purpose because it's good. I mean, laughter is good. Smiling minds remember. And
Absolutely.
I love it here that even though we're talking about A1 to A2 level, we have something like let your teacher know, which is a great expression to have. So it might prove a little bit challenging, but the way it is used, I mean, it should be okay for them to predict, to really understand what that is about.
And also think of these as launch pads for maybe productive activities. So we were talking earlier about reading linking into writing, and how that relationship is incredibly important and often forgotten, even in our first languages. But here you could use this as a model for them creating their own special day, imaginary day at school. So it could be a video game day, it could be a horse riding day, it could be, playing football day, a tournament. And they can then plan their own tournament and draw a picture, maybe start with drawing a picture, or do that as they go along. And then have role plays, maybe based on the one that we see here, or based on the ones they've created, Rosalia.
I love that idea. And I say, why is it that for some time now, have you noticed when you look at modern course books, you don't see ideas for role play very often?
No,
sometimes.
and it would need some supporting language from the teacher. But I think you could model that by saying, I don't know, Paulina, yours is a day, a family day, and you talk to Paulina about it. You elicit, and then you ask students, which questions did I ask? You make a note on the board, and again, some drilling of those questions so that they're confident with them. Questions that they can then use to find information about who, what, where, and why.
Right. And they can do, for example, for the role play, they could even go to start thinking about reporting these to their parents, right?
Exactly.
So that the parents can
there's
help
so
them
much.
remember.
What seems like a short activity can actually, like Rosalia said, be an hour's worth of class, maybe more. And this is hopefully how we're not going to be speaking to each other in the future, Rosalia, but we're looking at speaking now.
Exactly. Exactly. So, my husband would tell you I don't really need any sort of equipment when I'm speaking, not a microphone or anything related to that. Because my son is fond of saying, "You're too loud, Mom," right? And I know. But I love this activity, Johnny. We started talking about speaking, and we talk about it. And I love the way the final creation came to be. So please guide us through it.
Just like with reading, we started at word level, at a lower level, obviously on the CAFR. We're starting at word level for speaking, and this is just as easy doing in a classroom as it is at distance. You could even train students and possibly parents with something like this, whether you cover a picture and maybe you're practicing the vocabulary that you've done in the last week or last 2 weeks, or certain groups like holiday vocabulary or whatever. And so the quiz isn't just a paper and pen exercise, it's actually listening and speaking exercise. So you could be saying, oh, I don't know, this is yellow and you make castles with it. Ah, sand, fantastic. So which square do you want to choose? And then the student would say, I would like, or I want to see square 2. And you remove the square. So you can see this could work on a normal chalkboard. It could work on a whiteboard. All you would need is that picture beneath it. Or it could work even on a smaller scale in textbooks or on smaller pictures.
Right. And here, I think also important to remember, if they offer something different, like instead of I choose square number, if they say something along the lines of, can I see
Brilliant.
number 1, or right, it's that's great, right? When they go, because they're going beyond what you're giving them and they're actually creating and offering something different.
And we'd encourage to have that also available to them. And maybe, again, this is how you can extend activities. You practice that at the beginning, the questions that you could ask, give them 2 or 3, and perfect. Like Rosalia said, if any others emerge, you make sure those get jotted down. You know, big thumbs up for doing that. And so eventually they can start to guess. Oh, I think it's, I don't know, bedroom or a kitchen or something like that.
I think it's a bookcase. Is it a bookcase?
I think it's actually I think it's this picture here, which is it actually is a picture.
Okay.
I cheated a bit. But when people are looking at a code, you'll get all kinds of guesses. And again, that's a fantastic way to activate schemata. We've got some other ideas here so instead of jumping into the picture and saying, tell me what you can see in the picture, we've got all those little steps that we need to take so that when we ask them what's happening in the picture or tell me what you can see, they've got more language to use. And that feels good as a teacher to hear it, and it feels good as a learner to be able to produce it. And so very simple games like I Spy that you could play.
I spy with my little eye something blue, Johnny.
Is it the sky outside the window? No. Is it the cup?
No.
Is it the t-shirt the boy's wearing?
No.
Is it the box?
Yes.
Fantastic. So, you know, you're extracting and eliciting a lot of language with that. And that's something that even if you've looked at this picture previously, you could start a lesson off as a speaking activity. Open your, Bs, students that are Bs, open up your textbooks at page 5. You can see a picture. Okay, A's do that as well. You're going to play I Spy. So I Spy with my little eye, something beginning with, and again, you'll need some help in terms of drilling and supporting the production of that. But we've got, you could personalize it and get them to draw their own kitchen, for instance, which could be interesting. You could say true or false statements and see what they think. Like, oh, the clock is square. No, teacher, it's not square, it's circle.
That's a lovely idea, because always, I mean, you think of our learners, they love correcting the teacher, right?
Yeah,
so it's a great thing. I mean, there's a motivation for them, or something about, right, there's a story here. So what's the story? And when you ask, especially when you ask young learners, they know the story. They have ideas right away, right?
And the picture
so it's not just about describing, but actually telling the story. This tells the story. So,
or if you wanted to really build up, you could say, ask them to circle certain things, like literally finding things. Circle fruit. Circle time, they're circling the clock, circle the games, and it just gets them used to the picture before you're asking them to do an activity based around it. And here are some examples of how we might dial down. We could just have a vocab labeling exercise if you didn't think they were going to know too much of the vocabulary. What we call stem sentence support, which is the beginning of a phrase.
That's a very elegant phrase.
It is, isn't it? I like it. And then you could have there is, there are, ... He, she, is, ... eating, reading, this kind of thing. You could again have them completing phrases. So although it's a speaking activity, we don't need to jump straight into the speaking. We can do we could get them matching certain phrases with each other. We could get them joining dots, completing words, matching sentences. All of this gives us some kind of scaffolding. Some support for when the student, when you're asking them then for some actual spoken production. And to dial it up, you could, if a student's doing an activity where they're doing that with their partners, you say, find me 2 more things, or find me the things that are circles, find me the things that are squares, or draw on the picture, or write some phrases that aren't happening in the picture so that they can
That's a
share
great
those with.
idea, adding to the picture itself, right? And then they can describe it, because now it's become theirs, right? There's no other
Absolutely.
picture in the world with that course book.
And you've got them creating the questions, like we said earlier. They could create questions for each other, or false statements, and then they ask each other and they say, what color is the girl's t-shirt? The girl's t-shirt is pink. This kind of thing.
Exactly.
And so we're getting really into more creativity. We've got this wonderful quotation here, Rosalia, which I think came from your wonderful self.
I love Ken Robinson, and I love it. I love it when he talks about creativity. And there's a great talk, and I'm sure lots of people have seen it, because millions of people have watched it. It's a TED talk, right? And he talks about how some schools, I want to say some schools, may be killing creativity in the classroom,
well,
right?
here
Which is
we've got
very
some-
sad. But not the colleagues we have today, Johnny.
No.
We're sure of that, right?
Absolutely not. So,
But creativity is very important. If we give all the instructions all the time, if we just follow what's on the course book, all the activities there, if they can find it very easy to predict what our class will be like, because we always do the same thing day after day, we always start with the same thing, etc., we are not letting them use their imagination. We are not letting their minds fly and smile, right? And that is sad.
So you've got an idea for us here, Rosalia, I think. What can we do here?
I love this idea. I love monsters, right? And I love monsters because a monster can be absolutely anything, right? A monster can be square, a monster can be round, a monster can be rectangular, a monster can have as many or as few arms or legs, eyes, noses, mouths, etc., right? So this is great fun. You create, or rather they create, although I would be doing this myself too, because I love it, right? You create your own monster.
Teacher would definitely have to do it, yeah.
Right?
I
And
agree.
what are we practicing here? Well, all the different body parts, right? Also colors, and we said hobbies because then the monster may be holding something that has to do with his or her own hobby. It doesn't have to be a he monster, it can be a she monster, right? And what do we mean by teacher modeling? That you give them an example of what you expect them to see, right?
Yeah.
But I'm sure with this thing, and here it may be an elaborate thing, if your learners are used to doing this sort of thing, you don't even have to give them like the shape of the monster. They can come with the shape. And especially if it's not the first time you've done this in the classroom, don't give them the shape. They know they can go right away. So the student, and this is a very nice one, again, where you are reducing teacher talking time because you get them to describe and you draw, right?
Yeah.
And you have to follow. So they're not just following instructions this time, they're actually giving the instructions. And again, try and think of all the things that we usually do in the classroom that we should also encourage them to do themselves, right? Like they're not just getting them to answer questions, but actually creating the questions. So this time, don't give them the description. They give you the description, you have to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you could even, we had those pictures, we had the cards earlier, 1, 2, 3, all those cards. You could display them on the board or on the wall. You pick them up and put them on the blackboard, just with a bit of white or blue tack. And then somebody has to describe, this monster has 3 eyes. It's a boy or a girl. And then so you're training them to listen to each other. And then they'll get some, Lucia puts her hand up and goes, he's describing Rosalia's monster. Rosalia, is that your monster? Yes, it is. Well done. So he gets like a good tick or a smiley face on it next to his name on the wall. So training them to listen to each other is also very important.
Exactly, because we have to remember there's a time in their lives where young learners enjoy getting attention, but we also have to encourage them to pay attention to other people, not just the teacher, right, but their classmates as well. So that it really is very important.
And for weaker students, of course, you could lead it as a teacher if they had a very low level and say, you could have the features already there, and it could be a colouring exercise just to really tone it down a little bit, depending on the level of the students and their capacity really, and how good they are at doing things. Or they could select options. So you could have eyes, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, I wanted to have 6 eyes. Nose, big nose, small nose, medium nose, pointy nose, round nose. And visually or with the words, they tick and then they draw. So you're really building up to the drawing itself. Because I'm not very good at. I'm rubbish at drawing. I think less bothered now.
We saw your shark. Don't worry, we understand.
Pretty impressive. But then when I was younger, I would have been a bit more self-conscious about jumping straight into drawing a monster.
But remember what I told you: children are not afraid of drawing. They're not afraid of creating.
Slightly. Okay. So you might have some students.
I wouldn't call you a child, Johnny.
Or a little bit nervous about, or just they might finish it very quickly and be like, "That's enough." Whereas if you guide it by giving them options and like also almost like a checklist, how many eyes, how many noses, how many mouths, what color the features are, then you can extract a lot more from them. So when they're describing the monster later, it's gone on a big journey from a very simple beginning to finishing by being able to describe a very complete monster and showing it to the parents and maybe writing a biography, a little description of the monster, giving it a name, this kind of thing. Now, that's what we said there. You can create a profile for the monster, likes and dislikes, hobbies. And we were talking earlier about writing true or false statements or sentences to describe it. And that could be done as an all-class listening and speaking activity.
And I think we never even mentioned the name of the monster, right? But of course, that's something very important.
Absolutely.
Right? Because you want your monster to have a name. And again, if we look at the dial up options, for example, and these are just suggestions, you can have like for each one of the different activities we're suggesting, you can have 20 more things to add, right? But for writing 3 sentences, again, is where we have this is speaking, but we can go to writing.
Yeah, to give them thinking time so they don't have to jump straight into it. It's hard at this level for them to just produce language. They'll be able to produce very simple short phrases, but when they're incorporating recently learned vocabulary or that you're asking them to maybe have utterances that are a bit longer, then it's good for them to have some thinking time so they can organize their thoughts and write 2 or 3 sentences that they can use. And then you're building on the language they already have, not relying on the language that they've learned some time ago.
Right, and you can have them ask questions about other monsters, right? Like
I love the idea. Yeah.
Does your monster like pizzas, Johnny?
Definitely. If he's anything like me, he definitely likes pizzas.
Good.
He loves pizzas.
Does he like mango pizzas?
I don't think so.
That's a boring monster. Let's go on.
Mango pizzas. So, and then again, we've given you an example here, which we're going to be very brief on because we need to kind of skedaddle and speed up a little bit. Well, this is a describing picture. And again, looking at the element of draw and describe, you could begin by drawing or dictating a drawing to students and they draw. So like in a bedroom, there's this, there's that. You're modeling the language for them. You might be making a note of the language at the same time. They show, they compare each other's. And then you might open the textbook and start looking at the vocabulary and then eventually get onto the speaking activity. With this, I'm going to skip on to dial down and dial up because of the timing. But with this, like we said, you could do that approach first with the teacher. You could have the teacher exemplify. You could elicit the differences, again, by concept checking and saying, in both pictures, the carpet is circular. No, teacher, it's not. Really? Well, tell me. Picture A, it's square. Picture B, it's circular. Thank you, Pablo. And then you might make a note of that language. And it's really good, that language, or you might correct it, but pretend that Pablo actually came up with the whole phrase. Wow, well done. And you can also dial up by, if it's pictures that they've drawn themselves, maybe you start the lesson by saying, I want you to draw your dream bedroom, the bedroom you would love to have. Well, I've got a TV. I've got an Xbox, I've got a PlayStation, and I've got a Switch, I've got everything. Or I've got books, or I've got a drum kit. So you spend a few minutes doing that, and then then you work on the language to describe it. You might even have them write something or some phrases, and then they describe it to their partner. And their partner has to draw it. So yeah. A describe and draw dictation works beautifully. It really does. Kids love doing that. And quite frankly, I used to love doing that as a teacher.
Or create your ideal bedroom.
Exactly, your dream bedroom or your dream kitchen or your dream living room or something like that. Again, giving them that quiet time, that thinking time, and then building up with the language they need and the stem sentences or the phrases they need, and then getting them to describe. And we're going to
Exactly.
swiftly move on to listening. This is an idea of yours, Rosalie, that I really like.
Okay, because this, as we said, sometimes when we are, this is about listening, we don't really have to get them to use words to write, but it can be using emojis, right? So we decided 2 unsmiling ones for hate, only 1 unsmiling one, a frowning one for I don't like, a nice one for like, or I love. Well, you went for heart here, Johnny. You must be
Absolutely.
in love, right? Or you could for love you'd have for 3
Three
other
smiley
ones, right?
faces, yeah.
Right. I can't remember whether it was my apples usually look like hearts or my hearts usually look like apples, but these are the things that can happen, right?
But this is very, you could do this again on the board or dictate it and say, you could have the smiley faces at one end and the sad faces at the other, get them to tell you the emotions and complete the ones in the middle because they'll know some of the gradients like I don't like or I don't really like. You could practice some of that, but then the listening aspect of this is you say banana and they could write it if they want, or they could just draw banana in I like, for example, or grapes. I don't
I
like.
love green grapes, right?
I love, but
Yes.
yeah, this is a very kind of low intensive in terms of they're just listening, and it's a single word piece of writing, or even better, ticking or marking if they're already printed. But if it's really low resource, they could just draw in the column that it corresponds to.
Right, exactly. And whereas yesterday, we were talking about young learners, very young learners, pre-teenagers, teenagers, etc. Today, we're really paying more attention to the levels, and this is where I start sort of making you panic, Johnny, and
I was
saying,
doing it in a
I
subtle
think,
way before, but yeah, we need to really rush on. So
yes,
dialing down,
let's fly.
flashcards are great for single words for listening. You could get them to tap or point at the word you're saying. Realia, if you can take in actual fruit and things, obviously not having anybody touch it at all, but you showing them. And dialing it up, we have describing and drawing again. We have defend the best fruit. What's your favorite fruit and why? If it's getting to more of an early teen level, or even invent your own fruit, which primary would love to do. They might have square apples, or they might have one giant grape instead of a bunch of grapes. Who knows
Japanese
what they
are
come up with?
already ahead of you, Johnny.
Oh
The
dear.
Japanese,
It,
they're
as
already
with everything,
they
as with
have
everything.
square watermelons in
But we'll
Japan.
go. We're gonna just keep going along. So for this, which is quite a familiar task as well, where they're lining up the names of people with the descriptions. Again, let's get them involved in it. Let's say park. What do you think of when you hear park? Get some of those ideas on the whiteboard or the blackboard. Their experience. Do you like the park? When did you go to the park last? This kind of thing. I Spy, we could bring that out. TPR, this is a park example, but it could be any sort of picture. So you can do all kinds of TPR, total physical response, and get them guessing. You can get them doing that in pairs as well, or in small groups. Are you playing football? No, I'm not. Are you playing basketball? Yes, I am. That kind of thing. So
Exactly.
the activity here is listen and draw lines, but you could have them just pointing or ticking the words they hear, or get them to write on little bits of paper, maybe 5 of the words or the pictures, and they take the word when they hear it. So it's just a total physical response instead of having to do something with a pen or a pencil. And we've got some dial-up suggestions here, such as removing the names. So they listen and they write the names. So they're processing a lot there, but that's to push those classes or students that are really quite good. You could get them also to extend this with a gap fill, even in the same class. Some of them could be doing the draw. They could be listening 2 or 3 times to connect the people to the description. And some of the stronger students, if they've already finished that and in the first listen, you give them another handout which has got gap fills for particular language. It could be prepositions, it could be vocabulary, it could be INGs. So it gives them something else to do to keep pushing them.
Johnny, I spy with my little eyes somebody coming up very quickly to ask some questions. So let's see if we can go to the other ones, because this is a great idea.
Well, we're going to go. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So with listening, and then we're going to have writing very quickly at the end, I'm afraid. So listening and colouring, which we like, Rosalia, don't we? Just because It's relaxing.
Coloring is so relaxing. And coloring, please believe me when I tell you, don't just think young learners. I mean, adults, grown people have paid a lot of money to buy coloring books, right?
And you could simplify that again by going to word level, so they're not processing a whole utterance, but just listening out for one word. You could dictate things to make it a bit more complex. And I'm just going to quickly rattle through writing. I know that we're pressed for time, Rosalia, but word lists are a good thing that we can make the most of, aren't they?
And we'll share with them links for word lists for the different levels, pre-A1, A1, A2, B1, that they can download and start using. And I can see the bear here. I can also see Juan Carlos. And so we have American English word list, right? And we also have British English word list. And if Juan Carlos gives us just 1 minute and a bit, right, we'll just get to this. But don't worry, as we said, you will be getting the presentations and the reference lists.
Yes, don't worry.
Sorry, yeah, we're running over. Should we just have we got 60 seconds? I can't see people's reactions when I'm saying that. But we've got some other ideas.
No, we cannot. The answer was not. We cannot have 60 seconds. But I think the main idea here. Yes, Juan Carlos?
Yes, if you need it, of course.
You're great. Just 60 seconds, we promise. But the idea here, and this is what we're trying to encourage today, Johnny, and we hope that the message has been clear, is that with any activity, you can dial up and you can dial down. And you should try and do these as much as possible.
And consider it as part of your planning. We've got a checklist kind of principles or approaches table here, which we think is pretty useful in terms of how do we activate schemata, how do we consider low-level students, and how do we consider those that we need to dial up the difficulty a little bit more. The writing is worth looking at for reference after this, because we can obviously the PowerPoint's going to be shared. Apologies, we just meandered a little bit, maybe, Rosalia. We thought this was well timed, but we get sidetracked.
I think they will forgive us, but we tend to be creative and we enjoy doing these so much, right?
And part of the point there is that when you're planning, expand. What else can we do with this particular resource? How can we support and extend it? How can we recycle it? How can we reuse it in further lessons? And once you start picking apart activities, like Rosalia and I have shown, there are so many different ways of approaching them. And we've been distracted to the point of not properly covering writing, but you will have this for reference after the webinar. So I'm going to stop sharing there. Oh, in fact, we had one more question, but we're going to leave this as the final slide, which is,
you owe me the meerkat.
There we go. I just remembered as I was closing PowerPoint. So, looking forward. We hope that with some of the ideas from our relevant experience and ideas about how we can approach what's going to be ahead of us, we hope you can look at it with positivity from both webinars that we've done. So the one that we had yesterday on mindfulness and well-being, and the one today looking at how we can really accommodate for students of all kinds of levels in our classes.
There, we're ready for questions, Juan Carlos.
Okay.
I will stop sharing. You've got the meerkat. We've got the meerkat out there.
Yes.
No, don't worry. It was a blast to see your presentation. And for example, for all teachers, well, I think they're thrilled with your presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Teachers from all around the country, Michoacán, Puebla, Zacatecas, Chiapas, Quintana Roo, Chihuahua, everywhere.
Great.
Okay, I have another comment. For example, Marta Gomez Marquez says, Cambridge, Michigan, thanks a lot for sharing your knowledge. Everyone is so happy. Thank you very much.
Oh,
thank you.
Thank you.
If you want, let's start with the questions. I have the first one. It says, hola, gracias por el webinar. En un webinar de Cambridge, dentro del classroom, se hablaba que la perspectiva de las 4 skills estaba evolucionando hacia 4 models. ¿Pudieran explicar la diferencia, por favor?
This is what happens when we start talking about different things, right? And we tend to start saying, now we're going to be doing things this way. And what I can tell you is that there are so many different ways of looking at things and different perspectives. I don't remember actually having seen that one, but I know that we have really very creative Cambridge colleagues. Johnny, I don't know whether this was maybe one of the Fred Pukta seminars or one of the webinars we had during the Cambridge
I mean, yeah,
day.
it's true that the CFR has had some it's been updated, so it might be a reference to that in terms of looking at multi language and also
things like
mediation.
mediation, yes, very important.
Which hasn't quite filtered down into classroom levels yet. That would be the difference, I think, that there's a movement to go from to have the 4 skills and levels of integration between them, but above, maybe just above that, like these modes of communication that are kind of things like mediation, which can be, it crosses speaking, it crosses reading and writing and all kinds of things, because you're basically sort of translating concepts into stuff that's
Exactly.
understandable for other people.
Or as you say with mediation, when you read something, because that's a language you can understand, and then you explain in a different language to somebody who cannot read in that language that the text is in.
So very good question, and it's great that you're following those webinars. That is how the CFR is evolving and we've got colleagues back in Cambridge and Michigan that are heavily involved in that. So
yeah, so mediation.
From what you say, I think that's what the reference.
It does sound like, and mediation is really very important. And I'm happy to say to all of you who are interested in learning more about mediation, we'll also share links to some of the previous webinars that have specifically dealt with mediation. But don't worry, for the people who are, for example, preparing some of their learners for some Cambridge of Michigan exams, mediation is something that has always been taken into account, and you can see that. And I think that's a great subject for maybe a future webinar, Juan Carlos. Hint, hint.
Okay, we'll take it into account. Okay, another question, a quick question. For example, this is not a question, this is kind of like a common question, and it's from Gustavo Zúñiga Luna. Hello, Johnny, Rosalia. Can you give me some advice on how can I apply, dial down if I have students with learning difficulties?
I think that is a great question, and I think unfortunately sometimes we don't take those things into account. But for example, we know that we can have sometimes learners who have a dyslexia situation, or that they need more time, for example, to listen with more attention, etc. I think the most important thing is that you have to make sure that you understand that you have learners who are not, and I'm going to use here quote unquote, normal. That is, it's not the level that you would expect, but we talk about special circumstances, and then you see what sort of things you can do. If it's somebody, for example, who needs a little bit more time, you need to take that into account, because it's not that they are not learning, it's just that in their case, they need a little bit more time to do the things you're asking them to do. So it's important that you see, and I'm sorry to say, in many cases, we are not we're not very good at making sure that we understand that we have these situations, but it's very important to consider, right?
I mean, and again, not an expert at all in that, but you could have, I think, looking at the visual element and also taking some of the focus off producing written language. So if they're joining up, particularly for younger students, if they're just joining dots up to make words, they can do that. And that's rewarding.
Right.
And
if you have colorblind students, for example, that is something really very important to take into account, because then when you create your own exams, you know that color is something that you have to be very careful about, right? Because colorblind people, they do have something that makes it impossible for them to see some colors. So if you are asking them to identify something and color is the deciding characteristic there, then of course it won't be possible for them to answer that question correctly, right?
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Okay, we don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to ask you one last question. This one's very interesting is from Alfredo Granados Juarez. And he says, any advice on how teaching kids with sensory impairments, particularly with a total visual impairment? Greetings.
I don't think I've had that experience. I do remember, for example, having learners with hearing impairment. Johnny?
Visual? No, I've not. I mean, I've not had that before because you'd have to learn Braille or something, really, and they'd need to be. I mean, that needs. Yeah, that's a very specific question. Maybe that needs some consideration for the project in terms of accommodating learners with additional needs for when they're learning English. I honestly wouldn't know what to say on that. I'd have to research it with colleagues and stuff to really give a proper answer.
Okay, one last question. The last one, Ricardo Lagunes Cruz. Hello, I have a question. Is it necessary to correct young learners' pronunciation or just let them speak without worrying how they pronounce, knowing it is important to have good pronunciation?
Okay, here is maybe one of my pet peeves when people ask me, right? Oh, and Rosalia, and why does your English sound like that? And da 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 da. And they say, I would like my learners to have either American or British pronunciation, right? And I say, in most cases, our learners will have Mexican pronunciation because they are Mexican, right? And I think we can sometimes get a little bit obsessed about pronunciation, because if we think about the main objective of speaking, the main objective actually, not just speaking, of using a language, is communication, isn't it, Johnny?
Yeah. I think, sorry, I was reading the comments and I've got sidetracked. So what was, sorry, I'm very sorry.
Well, teacher, can you repeat the question?
The question was about pronunciation.
pronunciation.
So you've got to separate accent
Should we
from pronunciation.
Should we correct very young learners when it comes to pronunciation? I would say, did you understand what they said?
Yeah, if it's understandable, it's fine. One thing I would say is that teachers shouldn't be afraid to drill students, whether it's using your own voice or a voice off a CD or an audio. Quite often, the people that are most embarrassed and like least drilling are teachers. And the thing that students love the most, drills, when it comes to actually producing stuff. So don't be afraid to do that. They're not going to get it right first time, second time, might take a few times. But don't give up, and certainly don't really focus in and say, oh, Juan Pablo, repeat again, move on. You know, I would do, for example, class drills. I would do line drills, like when they're like in rows or lines like that. I would do boy or girl drills. I'm not sure if that's still okay to do now, but I would do things like that as well. Or people on this side of the room, people on that side of the room. And then I would go around and do U3, 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 and eventually get down to the to person level. Not for everybody, but you would share out depending on the day, like a few drills like that. Again, oh, fantastic. And even getting them drilling each other so that one side of the classroom is asking the question and the other side is answering. And I really think that you've got to prepare them and properly. Yeah, drilling in practice like that is important. If kids mispronounce, happens to everybody. I mean, as long as it doesn't interfere with communication, I think
exactly that's the main consideration, and that's why also it's very important that you give them opportunities to listen to different accents, and we can do that by using, if we have a CD player in the classroom, if you have, some people were talking about the virtual classroom, etc. If you can bring a different accent to the classroom, that can be really very helpful. But the main purpose is communication, right? So if communication is happening, that's okay.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for all your help, your participation, and everything. We have a lot of questions, but we don't have the time. Ahora les voy a pasar a Sark para la despedida.
Perdón, tenía apagado mi micrófono. Muchas gracias, Rosalía, Johnny. La verdad que valoramos mucho sus aportaciones, independientemente de que sabemos que en un espacio tan pequeño, tan reducido, a veces no es posible pues abordar tantos temas, tantas dudas. Cada caso es particular, cada profesor enfrenta diferentes situaciones, realidades. El tema de los materiales siempre nos genera dudas, inquietudes, cuáles son mejores, cuáles no son tan acertados. Al final del día, todas son intercambio de conocimientos, de experiencias, de expertise. Y eso creo que es el gran valor que tienen estos espacios. Entonces, de verdad, te agradezco mucho, Rosalía, Johnny, este acercamiento, esta colaboración que han hecho ustedes al programa, nos fortalecen mucho. Y quiero decirles a nuestros maestros y maestras que estas colaboraciones no solo son gratuitas, sino se hacen con todo el corazón, porque sabemos que el tema del Programa Nacional de Inglés es una prioridad y ha habido muchos espacios que no se han llenado, que no se han podido atender, y estamos buscando las mejores formas de llegar a ello. Entonces, esta es una de estas formas, que es el tema de ayudarlos con la capacitación, con la actualización, con el fortalecimiento en metodología de la enseñanza. Muchas gracias, Rosalía. Johnny, muchas gracias.
No, como yo les he dicho, me da mucho gusto decir, yo soy un resultado de la educación pública en México, soy una mexicana muy orgullosa, a mí me tocó tener excelentes maestros en el sector público y verdaderamente Johnny y yo cuando hablamos acerca del contexto de la educación en estos últimos meses, la primera palabra que llega a nosotros cuando visualizamos esto es, son héroes. Han sido héroes en todo lo que están haciendo y todo lo que se están preocupando, y no solamente preocupando, sino ocupando para que la educación siga, porque la educación es lo que nos ayuda a transformar a los países verdaderamente. Entonces, mis respetos para todos nuestros colegas.
Yeah, thank you very much, and it's been our pleasure to be involved in today. And yeah, like you say, it's only 1 hour and there's a lot to cover, but it gets us thinking about new ideas or possibly revisiting old ideas, and also some of those areas that we need to look at, whether that's for particular students with difficulties or classes that have certain issues with certain type of activities. So we're glad to have offered at least something to the great work that everybody is doing.
Pues, muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Johnny. Bien,
No,
maestro.
thank you.
Recordarles, gracias, Rosalía. Recordarles, maestros, que la información de estas charlas, conferencias, webinar, como ahora se maneja, están también las ligas y los videos cargados en la plataforma precisamente de la jornada nacional virtual, a la cual ustedes tienen acceso a través de su usuario y contraseña, que previo a registro fueron generadas por Google for Education, que es quien está prestando toda esta herramienta para poder hacerlo posible, y que en caso de tener algunas dudas, inquietudes sobre los usuarios, sobre el acceso, pueden acudir a sus coordinadores locales, quienes ya hemos establecido un mecanismo de mesa de ayuda para darle seguimiento a casos específicos. Les agradezco enormemente todo su apoyo. En verdad, siento mucho que ahora no se den algunas condiciones de otro tipo de acercamiento hacia ustedes, pero el chat que están ustedes alimentando todos los días, lo estamos revisando, analizando, y ninguna pregunta, ninguna propuesta, ningún planteamiento sobra. Todos son útiles para el programa en este nuevo proceso que estamos realizando, no solamente del plan y programa, sino, bueno, de toda la recontextualización del tema de la enseñanza del idioma inglés a nivel nacional, que es un gran reto, y que pues todos trabajamos en ello. Les agradezco, les deseo una excelente tarde y estamos